Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. Today, thoughts on the Itinerarium. In Ars Magica, magicians have final tests for their apprentices. The Fire Magi drop them in dangerous places with no gear and wait for them to come back. The Mystics have vision quests. The house most interested in the mundanes has a written test, which I imagine was based on the Confucian tests in the real world. The problem with it is that as a game device it doesn't work. The players can't share that story with others. In the house book for House Yarburton, I reworked it with the Itinerarium, which is based on the British tradition of the Grand Tour. This predated the pilgrimage rules, which might be an even better way to model the experience. The Grand Tour was basically a 17th century English thing. Rich young men, and occasionally women, were led around certain improving sites of Europe by a tour guide. These guides were called bear leaders, sometimes because of a supposed similarity to carnival performers with dancing bears. There's a sort of meta pun there. A Bajorna Magus with a bear heart shape or a werebear could run the thing, or keep an inn in a prominent place. But that seems to be pushing the characters hard for a single joke. Some later writers called the leaders of these groups cicerones, and this presumably relates to Marcus Tullius Cicero. I'm not clear on the link. Although it's a latter term, I like it, and I would use it in the world setting. I'm not sure where the Itinerarium should go in 1220. I had some ideas back when I wrote the house book, but in hindsight perhaps it would look something like this. I'm guessing it starts in Paris. Formally, I mean. In the English version, your parents would drop you at a port town on the Channel, and I'm guessing young magi are taken by their parentes through some significant local towns on their way to meet their cicerone somewhere near Paris, perhaps at the Convent of Eborus. From there, I suggest it needs to go to Valnastium, the Domus Magus of House Yarburton, Rome, Palermo, the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, and a safe place to meet Arabic scholars, and somewhere Greek. Constantinople still seems the obvious choice despite the sack of the Fourth Crusade. Presumably they stop at Athens on the way because it's under Latin control and is full of interesting art. Later, once the city-states become more prominent, the route might change, or at least slow, on the Valnastium to Rome leg. I also wonder if the Paris leg should head east to Dürrenmatt before heading south. I'd assume not. There were some people on the English Grand Tour who went back the way they came. The Alps, having few passes, acted as a sort of choke point for travel. A few more daring souls, however, found their way back through Germany. We might suggest the same thing. There's a Tremare-controlled spa in Pannonia that your characters might visit. Young magi might be allowed to use the various Tremare sites to influence their opinions. The Tremare habit of holding a tribunal meeting every year with an accompanying fair makes the detour through Hungary obvious and easy. That puts Dürrenmatt on the return leg, a sort of final point on the Grand Tour. Some story hooks. What souvenirs do you bring home from the Itinerarium? On the Grand Tour, Parmesan cheese was, apparently, especially prized as a souvenir. Samuel Pepys, in his diary, records that in the Great Fire of London he buried his cheese in his garden to protect it. Could a magus effectively lose a valued souvenir and get the player characters to seek it? Another idea is that I read of an author's home in England where the custodian added a ton of gravel to the driveway each month because tourists kept coming and taking pockets full of it. Could spreading tons of stone from a single region to places all over Europe create a mystical effect? Confidence men must flock to the route. It's full of young, rich, inexperienced people. What cons could, for example, a Titalis Magus pull on tourists? A covenant near the route might try and use it as an income source. What sort of facilities do they need to set up, and how can they influence the bear leaders to make them stop by? Just before the last election in the United States, women travelled to the grave of Susan B. Anthony and each added an "I voted" sticker. I suspect magi might do similar things. The place where Flambeau died might have a huge pile of burned candles. The Garden of Yarburton may have a visitor's book filled with the sigils of the great magi of history. What would your characters want to do? Who would they like to honour? Is there a memorial now? And if not, can they start a new tradition? A city is besieged, but the spaces within it are vital for the experience of the Grand Tour. How can the player characters get into the city, stay safe, and get out again, despite the obstacle? Final plot hook. A magus leads an itinerarium, but at his death it's discovered that one of the sites he visited was a fairy Regio. His heirs would like to continue his tours, but they need to find a way back into the Regio and a way to overcome the Portal Guardian. And now a quick dive into the rules. The Mystery Rules and the Grand Tour. The Mystery Rules, from Mysteries Revised Edition, allow players to exchange the completion of stories for virtues or the removal of flaws for their characters. Travel to places of spiritual significance is included in these mechanics. This makes the Grand Tour a series of short pilgrimages, which allows a character to gain virtues. The obvious choice for virtues is free expression, because it's based on art and culture, but if the tour is placed earlier in the education of each apprentice, it could provide various virtues, explaining why Yabtons do not have a single house virtue. Alternatively, if only some of the Yabton complete the itinerarium, it may be the source of the preponderance of gentle giftedness in the house. Something similar may occur in the training of Mercure characters. They gain virtues like well-travelled or a fluency with language by being forced to experience many cultures. The kernel of the rules is this. A minor virtue requires an initiation total of 15, and a major virtue requires an initiation total of 21. The total equals the Mystagogue's presence and their cult lore and a script bonus. House Yarburton is renowned for magi with high presence scores. Assuming that the itinerarium is a profession, this gives a total of perhaps 8 plus the script bonus. That would be presence of 2 and a house lore of 5, with 1 added for specialisation. Extraordinary characters could take that far higher, of course. So the script needs to reach 7 or 13 to successfully grant the virtue. This could be reached by some of the following. Travel to a special time and place is worth 3. The sacrifice of the initiate's time is worth 3. The Mystagogue's sacrifice of time is worth 3. A sympathetic bonus can be granted of up to 3. A repeatable quest can gain 3. The gaining of a minor flaw can gain 3. And the gaining of a major flaw can gain 9, which seems like overkill, except if the itinerarium is a series of quests to gain virtues, in which case there's a procedure by which some of the value of a major ordeal rolls over to future quests. A bear leader might invent a new variation on the itinerarium, using the rules on page 18 of Mysteries Revised Edition. I think those rules place too much choice in the hands of humans, as any of you who've been on the Atlas Games forum are probably aware, but they're in place, and so you may as well use them. Next week we continue our little experiment where we wonder whether the tales of Lord Dunsany are the reminiscences of a red cap recorded in the Book of Places You Must Not Go, with the distressing tale of Thango Bryn the Jeweller. It's got a very Conan feel, so if you like high fantasy, tune on in. Actually, even if you don't like high fantasy, still tune on in.